product teams and founders are under pressure, stuck in incremental roadmaps and burning out on short-term wins. Michelle Lee, partner and executive managing director of IDEO's Play Lab, shows why play is the hidden driver of markets that reshape industries.
And so gamification done badly, people just want the game to end. They just want their rewards, like end the game faster so I can get my rewards. True play you don't want to end.
In this episode, you'll learn how to break the trap of incremental roadmaps. Discover how playful divergence helps teams and founders uncover bolder product bets instead of chasing competitors. To spark breakthroughs that your competitors miss. Use playful tools like postcards from the future and sandboxing to unlock the next market-shaping idea. Measure what drives loyalty and growth. Move past vanity metrics to attitudinal loyalty and time well spent, so your product earns deep, lasting adoption.
What resonates with people is not the technology, it is the experience. And so we need to design the experience and then make sure we're using the right technology to make that experience come to life. And sometimes it's AI, sometimes it's something else.
This is episode 43 of the Design of AI podcast. Please make sure to rate this podcast if you find it valuable. Your podcast ratings and comments are the best way to influence which topics we cover in future episodes. If you want more AI strategy and research content, subscribe to our Substack newsletter at designofai.substack.com.
Hi, Michelle. You are the first guest we've ever had that's shown up with a whole wall full of toys. Can you tell us a bit about all the toys and why you brought them to the show here?
Oh, absolutely. Well, this is my normal office. This is usually where I take calls. So this is just representative of some of the toys that we've created in over 30 plus years of toy invention. So for many, we're a little known secret within IDEO. People know of IDEO, the company where I work, as a design consultancy that's behind the scenes of many of the products and services experiences you see out in the world. But we also do have a toy invention studio that sits within this larger consultancy where we invent toys that we then license to all the top toy companies. And you'll see a sampling of them just kind of sitting behind me here.
We're all after these incremental improvements, and they're kind of boring, and you're not going to build a billion-dollar company off incrementalism. Gotta be playful. We really need to challenge the idea of how we do things. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I believe play is one of the best ways to challenge the norms, to think wide, imagine new possibilities. It's really how kids engage with the world when they first come into being. Anyone who's a parent knows how many questions a child asks. And that step of being curious and asking questions is a first step to innovation, and especially breakthrough innovation, because it makes us wonder, why do we even do things the way that we do? Why should we keep doing things the way that we're doing it? Is there a real reason for it? I'd say like IDEO has been a really playful company from the beginning. David Kelly, who's our founder, started IDEO because he wanted to work with his friends. Play has been a big part of how we approach our work. And this is where I think it's also important to say that play for me is a mindset. It's how we engage with new challenges, new situations. And it is, as I said before, the ability to think about the possibilities and to go wide and to not be afraid to maybe get something wrong. So it's a very experimental attitude. And that's led IDEO to really break the boundaries of so many different industries over the last 40 plus years. I can point to one in particular, which I think if we want to talk numbers, PillPack was a project that we worked on that was eventually acquired by Amazon for close to $1 billion. So definitely something of value. But the reason that it did so was because it shattered the idea of what the pharmacy experience had to be. It said instead of having to go to your pharmacy, line up, and get your individual medication in pill bottles, what if we did it differently? And in this case, you have an app, you can order your medication. It knows if you have multiple medications, packages it in pouches that make it really easy for you to access your pills and to also give you confidence that you are taking the right pills at the right time. But the reason we got there and even knew this was an issue at all was because we were curious. We went out into the world and wanted to know if the current pharmacy experience works. And one of the best conversations we had was with an older woman who has arthritis, and she told us, I have no problem taking my medication, which, if we had left it at that, then we'd gone away, but like, there's nothing here. Let's not change this industry. But we don't like to stop with just the questions. We actually wanted to see how she accesses her medication. So we said, could you please show us how you take your medication? And she walked us into our kitchen and she pulled out a meat slicer and turned it on and then held her plastic medicine bottle up to the spinning blade. And all of us were just trying to hold back our extreme horror at seeing this and what could possibly go wrong. And sure enough, she sliced off the top of the bottle, took her pills, and we're like, see, easy. But it was, I think, that spirit of play of like, let's get curious, let's go meet people, let's see what's actually happening, then uncover that, no, there's got to be a better way. So I agree with you, Arfi. I think like really we got to start with that curiosity. We got to ask questions, and play is such a way to engage with that, to even uncover where the opportunities are.
There's something so special in what you just said. So let's start off with number one is you discovered that people do things differently than we all imagined. That's really, really cool. That's the power of design research. And we talked to your colleague, Savannah, about this. But then you also said the question, what if? Now, why is this question so hard for teams to care to ask?
Yes, there's definitely a gravitation towards the status quo, because the status quo is easy and it's what we know. And for adults who have been rewarded for having answers and to getting to solutions quickly, we don't want to ask the questions because the questions open up the possibilities and you just want to get stuff done. I like to talk about how kids and adults think very, very differently, because adults do converge right away. You have a question and you're like, well, what's the answer? And you just want to make the solution. Kids, on the other hand, are really good at diverging. They go really wide in their thinking. So for instance, if you, again, are a parent and you're trying to get your kid out of the house, it takes much longer than just putting your shoes on, because suddenly their shoe becomes a little car, it becomes an airplane. And the difference is that adults get things done right away, but it's not very inventive. It's just the way we do things all the time. Kids, on the other hand, because they're asking, well, what if it was a car? What if it was an airplane? They just come up with all these possibilities. And once you have a variety of possibilities to choose from, that allows you to get to more interesting places. Adults just want to get it done, but unfortunately, it might slow us down in the long run, because then what we get to are incremental changes or things that have already been tried or that our competitors are doing, which means you're just constantly chasing to try to get to something bigger, versus if you can hit a big innovation from the beginning, it gives you a little bit more space.
Our next AI product strategy workshop is happening on October 30th. In this 3-hour online workshop, you'll leverage our framework for discovering and pressure testing disruptive AI product ideas. Get more information and register at designof.ai/workshop.
I feel like we as adults have gotten to this point where we try to overcome that by being like, okay, well, if we're going to be incremental, let's be incremental really fast, right? Like, let's do a bunch of incremental things really fast and move ahead. And so we see teams that are really focused on this like faster, cheaper AI. But in your experience, what do you see as the real opportunity that they're missing when they don't integrate play, when they don't ask what if?
Yes. So I think it's really interesting that people look at AI and they think fast and efficient right away. And I think even adopting a mindset of play when you look at how you use AI is important. Again, like, what if I use AI to do this, right? Bringing that what if question that RP said is so important, because I think too many people just take the tools off the shelf and use them exactly as they're said to be used. What I love is when people push even how they're using their AI tools. And I think a really great example, there's a couple designers on my team. I was talking to them and they were mentioning how when they use Midjourney, they don't actually use the latest version of Midjourney because it's almost too slick. It gets the answers too quickly, too easily, too perfectly. They like to roll it back to version 1 when it used to make mistakes. And that's intriguing for them because the mistakes make us think as human beings. It doesn't just do the work for us, but when AI or other technology has an error, it catches our attention. And that gets us to dive deeper and like, well, why did that happen? What could that lead to that's different? I think one of the things we've played with is how to use AI to invent games. And one of the early tutorials is like, well, just use it to create an existing game. And so you can use AI to basically vibe code like tic-tac-toe. But the early versions of AI that didn't always get it right sometimes put your X way off the board. But that makes you question, well, what would the game be like if you had the pieces not in the grid? Could that create a whole new game? And I think that's the imagination, that's the spark that excites me as a designer to think differently and literally outside of the box in that situation.
Obviously, product teams get rewarded for incrementalism. Like, we like to pretend otherwise. We like to pretend that we're all innovative, they're all disruptive. But when you think about an organization, it's about predictable outcomes, it's about hitting your targets, it's about not screwing up, it's about falling in line. And it just feels like we're in a trap of incrementalism. I'm just wondering, for you as the consultants that get brought in when there's no path forward anymore, what are the risks of the companies that can't crack this?
I mean, there is a time and a place for incrementalism where you just have to get something done, like an assembly line where it's straightforward and the solutions are not that complex. I do think we're in a different world right now where a lot of the challenges we're facing are more abstract, that can't be solved just one-to-one, but actually are more systems challenges, require us bringing together different parties, different processes that have pre-existed in new ways and making new connections. And that's where I think the incremental improvements don't serve us well anymore. Things are changing so quickly. If we move incrementally, again, we're just going to be chasing all the time. Like, we're even seeing our tools, all the AI is changing on, it feels like a daily basis. So how do we get beyond that thinking of incrementally to think longer term, knowing that if we solve for what's right in front of our faces, it might be obsolete in another week or two. And that's just going to tire us out. I think that burns us out when we're constantly chasing. So as we're looking at these more complex challenges, how do we think further out? How do we think 5 to 10 years out? How do we be observant of bigger signals that we're seeing in the world that point us to what the future might hold? And it might feel like more work immediately, but I think in the longer term, it does get you to a place where you've leapfrogged the competition enough that you, again, have space to keep innovating and trying new things versus playing catch up on a constant basis.
May I ask, is discomfort the opposite of playfulness? And I'm asking because when I think of my own kids, they get playful when they're uncomfortable with the nothingness. What
Yeah.
are the forces opposing each other here? And is that part of why in corporate boardrooms there's always a focus on just get anything done rather than do the right thing?
I love this question because there is a common misperception that play is about making things easy and not difficult, when actually the opposite is true. So if you think about it, if you were to give a child two different options and one was super easy, say walk from here to the kitchen, very few would just walk a straight line and take the shortest path from here to the kitchen. As a child, I love to play the game Lava. I don't know if you played that as well. I know it's been popular among, I see nods. And Lava is the opposite of taking the straight line and walking on the floor. It is about trying to avoid the floor altogether and to climb on furniture, to hop from one thing to another. Kids in play, they actually set up obstacles to make the everyday harder. And there's a reason for that. It's because through challenges and through obstacles, that's how we create meaning. That's how we actually create satisfaction and joy. Because when you overcome those hurdles, those feel really good. It's also where we come up with new solutions, which feel way more satisfying than if you were just to do it the way that anyone else does it, in which case, if I just walked to the kitchen, I probably wouldn't even think about it. It would be not a major moment in my day. If I were to balance on all the furniture and get there, one, I think it'd be a lot more fun. I'm sure there'd be some laughter along the way and probably a little bit of stumbling, but it'd be more memorable. It'd be more fun. I'd probably make some connections as people around the office like stop by and asked what was I doing. And I think all of that is important for several different reasons. I think it does lead to more interesting outcomes because, again, we're challenging the norms and we're trying something new and we're allowing our minds to think in new ways, but also makes the process itself much more enjoyable. So it's in the delivery of what we ultimately can create because we're thinking differently, as well as making the process enjoyable for those who are partaking in the experience of creation and thinking in new ways.
I actually really love what you were just saying a minute ago about incrementalism being like a zero sum game, that we're just constantly playing catch up then. And by looking at the what ifs and the 5 years out and integrating play, we're actually creating almost a moat for ourselves because we're thinking without the constraints of trying to catch up with everybody else. So I just wanted to reiterate that because I thought that was such a wonderful description that I haven't heard many people talk about. Can you share any stories where play has led to a product or a market that no one saw coming?
Yes. So I think what's intriguing is a lot of times when new technologies come about, we talk about the technology itself. So we talk about, oh, AI and how amazing it is. And this is where I think we get clients coming to IDEO and saying, tell us how to use AI. Like, how do we implement AI in this solution? When in fact, what resonates with people is not the technology, it is the experience. And so we need to design the experience and then make sure we're using the right technology to make that experience come to life. And sometimes it's AI, sometimes it's something else. Like, we don't want to hit the small nail with the oversized hammer if that's not what we need. Like, what is the right thing? Sometimes that can be even distracting or cause new problems. So play is really that vehicle that brings the technology to life in a way that people can relate to it, can get excited about it. So when I think about a good example of that, I think about something like Pokemon Go, where I think in that example, like, augmented reality had been around forever, but not really found a lot of great footholds, where it was interesting, but it was very gimmicky where it showed up. Whereas Pokemon Go was built on technology that Niantic created. It was a group that spun out of Google Maps, knew a lot about how do you figure out just the mapping itself, but also how do you then overlay images on our real world in ways that are really engaging. And I think a lot of people, kids who engage with it, weren't like, oh my gosh, I'm engaging with AR. There's like, wow, I get to actually immerse in the world of Pokemon. I get to interact with Pokemon in a new way. This is allowing me to collect and to have fun, to explore. And that's what matters. And so it is about what are the experiences we're creating. And that will come from thinking about what brings people joy and excitement. And so starting with play as the anchor of like, what are we designing and what will resonate with people? And then layer on what's the right technology to bring that life. And I think Pokemon Go really nails that. It found the perfect combination of an application for technology that hadn't really found a home and gave people a new way to engage with their devices, to relate to them differently, and just started a whole movement where suddenly you saw these people around and they kept doing this thing and you're like, what is going on? Totally unexpected, took the world by storm, and just started changing how people thought about how they relate to this technology.
I love this one. Brittany and I were in Vancouver a couple of weeks ago, and we saw a mob of 200 people just wandering by, and you never see that anymore. You never see that amount of people. And we guessed that's what it was, and it was. It's crazy. Now, your story is
Yes.
amazing because you're right. It's not focused on the technology. It's not like people said, oh, I have mapping technology, and now I can follow a video game. Like, it's no one talks about it that way. The same way when the Wii came out, it wasn't, I have an accelerometer. Do you want to play with my accelerometer? That's not the way it is. But if we take this and layer it into more practical things, Waze uses the same mapping technology, and Waze is kind of fun. It's practical. It's really useful. It's engaging, and it's a great real world use that's a business. I'm intrigued by the history of this. And I look back at a company like Apple, where their motto is think different, and they've lived by that motto, but then they become an incremental company. What are some other success stories, and what are some lessons we can pull from what they did well and perhaps how they might have lost the plot too?
But then as we get older, we feel like we can't play, that adults don't have that same permission. And so then we fall into this work world and doing things that are more incremental, that are more about convergence and not divergence. I think that happens with companies as well. So if you think about startups, they're out there experimenting. They're doing things that are wild and different. They're breaking the mold. They're the challenge. And so in some ways, they're given the same permission to play that children are. So I think that's where originally Steve Jobs could come into the world and be like, I'm going to introduce this whole new graphical interface. I'm going to introduce the mouse, which luckily IDEO had a part in that history too, creating the very first Apple mouse. But then over time, you get beholden to like, I have to hit my numbers. You're starting to look at metrics that I think aren't always in service of innovation. How do I hit my quarterly targets? not how do I be something really amazing in 5 years? How do you have the room to create something that's truly innovative? Which is hard when you're just looking at where do I need to be tomorrow? We see that with even companies like Lyft that started off with the pink mustaches on their car and fist bumps. You see it with Mini when they first started off, and they were making great use of that wait period between when you ordered your car and when it was delivered to you, where you got stickers, you felt like you were part of a club, you could go race your car at racetrack. But eventually as they got bigger, some of that fun fell out. And I think part of it is because it's really hard to use our current metrics to capture the ROI of play. And so when we don't have that, it falls back to the metrics that we do have. And unfortunately, that doesn't always do a good job of capturing engagement, innovation, and your connection to the customers, the end users that you're trying to serve.
What do you recommend then in terms of metrics for engagement and fun and just play in general, right? Like how do you track for that?
That's a really great question. And that's one that I'm still constantly trying to chase down. I think play is something that we intuitively know serves us well, especially when we think back to our youth and how play is how children first engage with the world. Yeah, in terms of metrics, I think we do need to look at like what is, I'm actually in a number of loyalty projects right now. And so my head goes straight to a lot of what we're seeing there. One of the frameworks we have is that there's two different kinds of loyalty. One is behavioral, and that is how do I get people to do things like purchase things, increase their basket size. But the deeper, stronger loyalty is attitudinal loyalty, is where someone actually feels deep affinity for a brand. They feel it ties to their identity and who they are. And I think play's really great at building attitudinal loyalty because play is about aligning motivations. And I think play is part of human nature. We all gravitate towards play. We find reward in play. So do people keep coming back? Do they do it willingly, or are they just doing it because you've entrapped them with a system, whereas if you leave them, you lose your status? Like, I believe in how do you reward people coming back? How do you give them the feedback to know they're on the right path? But again, they have to want to do it on their own. So if we can figure out what those metrics are that really get to that deeper attitudinal loyalty, that would be the gold.
A couple months back, we had spoken with Christy J. Fisher from PlayStation, and she was speaking about, because she has the same challenge, right? Like, how do you track and model for the KPI of fun and engagement and play? And she was talking about this model around time well spent.
I love that. I think that's a great way to put it. And it's, again, one of those things that we know, we can feel it. It's hard to figure out how to post that to a board as a number. But I think we understand is if we pursue something we love, we're less burnt out. We're more inclined to keep at it. I guess one way I could put it is that play is really interesting because I think so much in life is about the end product. And this is actually where we differentiate true play from, I think, where gamification has been badly bastardized, where I believe that we should learn from games. Games are really powerful. Game designers are brilliant. But so many people looked at games and just took surface level what games are doing well, which is why you see points, rewards, leaderboards, but that aren't tied to the deeper psychology and the motivations of why people want to play. And so gamification done badly, people just want the game to end. They just want their rewards, like end the game faster so I can get my rewards. True play, you don't want to end. This is where you will see kids and they're wrestling. And if someone pins them, they will try to change the rules or flip them over. They're like, let's play again, because they don't want it to end. They don't actually want to win. So if someone has someone pinned, they might actually let up because they want the play to keep going. That's one way to put it. Is this an experience that we want to keep going, that we want to perpetuate, that we could spend forever doing? Or are we just counting down the minutes and waiting for this to end so we can collect our reward at the end?
This raises this interesting thing about NPS, right? NPS is the likelihood to recommend. And we should want to be telling people to play this game. We should never want to stop it. We should want everyone to participate. It just feels like we've overlaid the wrong metrics to reward happiness and reward success. We've had other guests on who were talking about that time well spent is defined by, well, I was able to do more tasks in a certain amount of time. We've had other guests who are talking about that accuracy is obviously time well spent. But nonetheless, I'm just wondering, have you explored any new philosophical areas when it comes to time well spent and just KPIs in a world where probabilistic interfaces can really trick you up in terms of what was time well spent?
I can say time well spent for me is where I feel like I'm still learning and growing, which I think getting back to our AI question, one of my fears is where people rely on AI to do too much for us. We're not doing it for ourselves, which then stunts our learning and our growth. In terms of philosophy, one of the folks I turn back to over and over again is Csikszentmihalyi and his theory of flow, and the idea that we are happiest in the state of flow. And again, flow is a state where you don't want to leave it. You want to stay in flow when we've perfectly balanced the challenge that we're given with our skill level, with the idea that our skill level continues to grow as we're continuing to be challenged more and more. And this is where I do want us to keep using AI as a tool and pushing our own learning and our own abilities through AI. So where we can push ideas further, we can iterate faster, we can put really great ideas out there that are tested and de-risked, because if I can't code, I can use AI to help me get tangible faster or to try out my ideas faster, but not just to get to the answer for me or to do the work for me, because then I worry that we stop thinking for ourselves, that we aren't learning and growing ourselves. I also do believe that human potential we can add on top of these tools will get us to better places. And I want us to keep our quality bar high. I want us to continuously strive for things that are great and not just take what ChatGPT spits out at us. And I actually get really excited when ChatGPT can't figure something out, because more wisdom from some of my designers on my team, Neil, Jeremy, I'm constantly talking to them. They mention how sometimes it's great when AI is wrong, because you can ask, well, why can't you solve it? Or what's the challenge here? And one of the things that ChatGPT can be good at is articulating what the problem is, which then allows us to think as humans of like, well, what's the solution now that I can better articulate what the challenge is? So this is, again, is like, how do we use AI in ways that aren't the ways that most people are using it, that are prescribed to just solve challenges for us? How do we use it to push our thinking and help us push our own craft and answer questions in more interesting ways that I really still believe that only humans can do?
It's true. And you can be really aggressive with these LLMs, or you can be like, be sillier, be sillier, be sillier, be sillier, be sillier, be sillier. You can ask it 100 times and it will escalate to a level that's just completely and incomprehensibly ridiculous. But the fact is, you can also go the other direction and take all the humanity out of it, unfortunately.
Yeah, let's keep having fun with it. It is a tool like so many other things. And so it's ripe for experimentation. It's ripe for us to see what it can do to push its limits. My one caution there, though, is play is great when there aren't huge consequences. That's what allows us to take risks. So this is where I try to be really clear about how do you create a sandbox for you to experiment in, where you can control what data is coming into it. You can control who has access to what you're creating, because it does get really dangerous if you're experimenting in the wide open with people who don't know that you're experimenting or don't know the possible concerns that you might have. So I think just being really intentional, like, where are you experimenting? Where do you have to actually start converging and doing the adult thing, because you're putting something out into the world and you really don't want to bring on unintended consequences that could cause harm that you really don't want to clean up later on. Like, let's get it right to begin with. So experiment in that sandbox, try things, let your imaginations go wild, but do make sure that when you're releasing something more openly into the world, that it's safe for consumption and that people who are engaging know what they're getting into.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a super important warning. Let's talk about then the next step, right? So what's an example of a playful idea that during that testing and exploration, it just seemed too silly to work? Like, it shouldn't have worked, but it just ended up turning out to be really powerful or really interesting and was able to be released into the wild.
Yeah, this goes back a while, and it's interesting because it did bring up questions of AI, but this was over 10 years ago. We, early on in making toys, I think noticed that when it was like 2008, 2009 or so, when the iPhones were just out, that everyone was surprised that parents were handing these devices to their toddlers. I mean, it cost hundreds of dollars, but one, parents had no problem handing them to their young children. And two, the young children knew how to use it better than we did. Like, my kids are still showing me features on my phone that I had no idea existed. And it was great to see that. The only problem was early in those days, there weren't kids apps. So kids were taking things like the beer drinking app, all these gag apps, and then holding up, be like, look, mom, I'm drinking apple juice. And so like, well, there's got to be something different, something that can be designed more for kids if they're really in this space. And we found a really great partner with Sesame Workshop. So makers of Sesame Street with Big Bird and Elmo and all of our furry friends. And their mission is to be everywhere that children are, because they want to be able to reach as many children as possible to teach them important skills for life. And we worked on an app with them, and it was based on the idea that young children, even before they can talk, walk around with their hand to their ear, pretending like they're talking on the phone, which is fun because now we have like different phones, but kids will still walk around like this. So we're like, well, let's create an app where kids can talk to Elmo. And as you can imagine, initial thoughts are like, well, we need voice recognition, we need AI so Elmo can respond to you. And because we're a human-centered design firm, we test our ideas early and we go out and we observe what people are doing. And we found that a lot of these kids are FaceTiming with their grandparents. And one of the things that helps them know that they're FaceTiming with their grandparents is they can see themselves in the corner. So when we saw that, we experimented with like, what if we just turn the front-facing camera on so they can see themselves while we have Elmo in a video talking to them? And lo and behold, that's all they needed. Their imaginations could take everything a step further. And we didn't need to do voice recognition or AI, which in retrospect would have been somewhat creepy. Like, especially with kids' products, you can't get away with things like that. Kids talk to Alexa and Siri all day long. But when Mattel tried to release Hello Barbie, they got shut down right away because you have to be really careful with kids. So it actually ended up being a blessing that we realized that we didn't need to do investigation AI. It would have been really expensive and hard to 10 years ago. But what was really powerful is a silly app that just allowed kids to talk to Elmo became not just a way for them to engage with Elmo and learn like their ABCs and also hear jokes and stories, but it's also on the back end a tool where parents can trigger certain calls that has Elmo call your child, encourage them to use the potty, or talks them through a scary experience like going to see the doctor, or encourages them to brush their teeth. So it really looked at how play can be used as a vehicle for behavior change. And again, was just this really great combination of the technology of the iPhone, but used for a purpose that really resonated with both children as a toy and parents as a tool that still has it as one of the top preschool apps almost 10 years later.
Wow, amazing. I wish I had known about that when my kids were a little younger. So we have people who are listening who are trying to build, and they're trying to come up with a product that can be feasible and profitable. So let's get tangible here. If a team set out to specifically to discover the next like billion-dollar AI market, what steps should be on their roadmap? Like, what does playful exploration look like in practice?
I love that I've given some workshops, and one of the takeaways that people had where they'll come up to me like weeks later and say, hey, I'm still wearing my kid's hat. So I think number one is like, wear your kid hat. Are about those moments when you need to diverge. And you have to make space for this. Design is about diverging and converging. So you have to think like a child and come up with lots of possibilities and imagine. And then once you have lots of possibilities, you can converge and start deciding which ideas are the best ones that you want to take further. But if you don't allow time for diverging, you're going to, again, just do incremental changes, which we already established is not what most companies want to do. So to have those big ideas, make room for diverging. And that is very consciously saying, I am wearing my kid's hat right now. I am taking the time to explore. I'm taking the time to ask what if. I'm taking the time to challenge my own assumptions and my organization's assumptions, to bring in fresh perspectives by interviewing people like the lady that we spoke to understand that accessing her pills was not an easy thing. It's about taking field trips to see what other people are doing that is interesting that you might bring back to your industry, even if it's an unrelated industry. But say you're trying to develop a video game and you go to talk to people who are trying to learn trampoline aerobics. Like, what is the onboarding that happens there you can bring back to your challenge right here about onboarding people to a video game? All of that is about exploring, about going wide, about giving your mind lots of inputs, lots of fodder that then you can help process and make interesting connections to come up with innovative solutions. And if you can separate the diverging from the converging, that will get you there. So make time for diverging, even though it might feel like a detour, might feel like you're just straying away from the answer. Take that time to diverge and then put your adult back on. And that's when you can start being like, okay, now let's figure out like budget, let's figure out timeline, all these constraints that you've been holding off when you had your kids' hat, because now you have your possibilities, you have your fodder. Now make something happen.
I'd love to know, are there any other specific exercises that you find are helpful? And are there specific circumstances in which injecting play into them overcomes the limitations or the dead ends that sometimes happen in these conversations? Let's recognize that quite often there's groupthink and there's a fear of being wrong, and someone has to stand up and overcome that. Just wondering if you've had some experiences that were good and, again, moments.
Yeah, we have a few tricks up our sleeves. One, again, to get people to think further out, is we will do things like have them generate postcards of the future. That's a really simple one that I love. And it might require a little bit of imagination to start with. So sometimes I will just have people close their eyes and imagine themselves in a time machine and have them kind of elevate from where they are right now, see where they are in their present state, but kind of send themselves all the way out to space and then spin around as the Earth accelerates 5-10 years in the future and then come back down. And with their eyes closed, just what do they see? Like, what do they tangibly see in this world? How is technology being used? How are people interacting with each other? How are they interacting with the world around them? And then when they open their eyes, they pull out a postcard, and I will actually make them physical postcards, and they write themselves a postcard from the future. And they tell themselves, what did they see in very tangible words? What did they see? What did they feel? What did they smell? And then from that almost gives them a North Star of what they can possibly shoot for. What do you then need to do to achieve that future? But I think it does help to sometimes first go further out. And that gets you past that incremental of like, oh, do I have to first imagine what happens next week and then next month and the next year? It's like, no. Leapfrog all that. Actually, I'm going to take you 5-10 years out, see what you see there, and then work your way backwards. What do you need to do to achieve that future? And I think that's a different way of thinking that we're not always used to as adults.
The idea of future casting and postcards from the future and all of this can be really difficult for some people to wrap their head around. And I've found for myself, like any strategic foresight work, usually you end up having to validate it, right? Or really sell people on it. So what is the way that you would describe why this kind of future casting work can really challenge assumptions and make a big impact on teams that are struggling to get beyond the incremental?
I think it frees us from our own constraints, our own assumptions, which is step one. Like, in order to achieve a different new future, we have to see it first. So this basically allows us to visualize that future and see something beyond what's right in front of our faces. We spend so much time staring immediately in front of us, and that's literally like looking at the screens and only seeing the words right there. How do we give ourselves space and intentionally look more into the horizon? And I think that's beyond what's in front of us. And that means like looking at different perspectives and different experiences, but it's also the time horizon of how do we look much further out. And I think that does give us that permission to break what we see right now, because right now is where we see all the constraints, what we can't do or what's not possible. The future is where we see what's possible.
Are there any products that are building that future, ones that are setting a new paradigm, ones that you love to recommend, not only because of their philosophy, but how they are challenging assumptions? Are there any you want to recommend?
Yes, I think there are a couple. So one, I'm going to get just like, again, like how do we take people away from the technology and AI itself? And Mothland that Casio developed, which is a furry pet, relatively nondescript, but it's furry. It's got cute eyes and it adapts as you interact with it. So it evolves its emotions and its interactions. One thing I love about that is that it uses AI to do all of that. But when you pick it up, it's a furry pet. You're not looking at a screen. It's not some faceless voice interaction. It's something that you connect with at a deeper level. So I love that it's challenging it that way. I still need to get my hands on one. It's very hard to get a hands on one. I think the popularity already speaks to how it's defying just being AI. It is much more of an experience and something you can relate to. The other I'm going to point to is Open Studio, which is a company started by some brilliant alums from IDEO. And it's a design tool where I think they acknowledge that designers don't necessarily intuitively engage with their designs by prompting. And so what's a different way to interact? It's for the designers, the creatives, for visual thinkers, where you can get an image and you can draw right on top of it. So you can annotate it, and it's smart enough to understand what you're annotating, what you want, to be able to then change the drawings, to create renderings. But it is just thinking about how, again, designers naturally interact and not forcing designers to change the way that they're interacting with these tools, but adapting the tool to work more intuitively with how we naturally want to design. And that product is still being released, so you can check that out at openstudio.ie if you want to get early access and give it a try yourself.
Fabulous. And what is the best way for people to follow along on your experiments, your writing, the projects that you're working on?
Yes, so I try to stay somewhat up to date on LinkedIn, so you can find any talks or articles that I'm writing up there. I also like to highlight things that I'm seeing in the world, so you can also check out some of the things that I'm commenting on. And then IDEO, of course, has newsletters, and we're constantly posting new case studies to our website. If you want to also see what we're learning and partake in some of those classes, IDEO is a great way to catch up on some of that. We have some stuff around AI too. So yeah, I think lots of different ways to keep in touch, whether LinkedIn or through IDEO's formal channels.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure.
It was wonderful speaking to both of you. Thanks for the opportunity.
This episode was hosted by Arpi Drag-Figueredo and Brittany Hobbs. This episode is brought to you by PH1 Research, a research and strategy consultancy specialized in mapping the future of your business and product. Get more info at ph1.ca.